here. We made it. It's officially 420 Week of Unity. This is so exciting. I know that so many people have put so much time and effort and work into this, and now we're kicking it off. It's Monday, and we've got a whole packed week full of things for everybody to do, both online, like this panel, or in person in Washington, D.C. And this is just so incredible. This is this historic moment. We've got folks from so many different organizations across the left-right policy, political spectrum, in the industry, in the nonprofit world, in the advocacy world, and we're all coming together to fight for one thing because it's so important to all of us. Far too many people think that the fight for cannabis justice is done, and all of us here in this room know that it's not. We still have so much to fight for. So many people are still in prison. Over 250,000 people were arrested in the United States just last year, 92% simply for marijuana possession. And these problems continue. So it's so important that we recenter our message and that we push for the policies now that we really want in the long term. In one of our previous conversations, we talked about some of the legislation that's being considered in Congress right now. And so we know that there's a whole lot of interest that's happening. Both of our guests today are the result of interest that's happening on the White House. But it's really important that we don't allow these to be one-off measures that that don't actually get us to that future of freedom for free people that we had all hoped for. And so I'm so excited that we get to kick off our 420 week of unity today with both of these folks, both amazing people, friends of mine, hopefully friends of yours. They'll be joining us in Washington, D.C. in a couple days. Valerie Douroux Schulz and Chris Goldstein. Thank you both for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about what brought us here today and what really started this 420 week of unity. Because on the campaign trail, President Biden said, quote, "We should decriminalize marijuana," and he promised that we should let everyone with a marijuana record out of jail. Their record should be expunged and they'll be completely zeroed out. That's his term, not mine. We're not there yet. What happened? So we're coming to DC to demand that he keeps his promise and that all of our elected representatives in Congress finally end the decade-long war on cannabis. On October 6th of 2022, that's about 2 years ago almost, President Biden, in what was billed at the time as the largest ever act of clemency in a generation, announced a mass pardon for people convicted of federal marijuana possession. Just 14 months later, he again issued a blanket pardon. Unfortunately, not one single person was released from prison as a result of either pardon. So whom did they actually benefit? Well, actually both of our guests here today. Valerie Douroux Schulz is an alum of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We actually knew each other as chapter leaders far too long ago. And she's the former leader of SSDP's University of Utah chapter. In 2022, Valerie received a pardon from President Biden for a previous cannabis charge. And she's used that opportunity to advocate for wider retroactive justice for more victims of the war on drugs, as well as the full legalization and decriminalization of marijuana. We also have Chris Goldstein, who is an American radio personality. The first time we talked, I wasn't quite sure why I recognized his voice, and then I realized it's because he did the Normal podcast for so many years. And so I remember listening to it when I first got involved in this movement back in 2007. So he's been around. He's always been a friend of SSDP. He's a regional Normal organizer and a dedicated marijuana activist. And his Smoke Down Prohibition protests helped lead to the decriminalization of marijuana in Philadelphia. It also put a cannabis charge on his record. So in 2023, Chris received a pardon from President Biden. And then in 2024, literally just a few weeks ago, he was invited to an exclusive roundtable conversation at the White House where he pushed for cannabis justice. And this is big, y'all. He got Vice President Harris to explicitly state, quote, "We need to legalize marijuana." So I'm so happy to have you both here today. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be.
So I talked about it a little bit, but can you guys tell us a bit about the charges that put you in the situation in the first place?
Chris, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Yeah, mine were a simple possession charge. It was a half a gram of marijuana that got me dragged into federal court. Like you said, we were protesting. This was way back in 2014, and we were protesting federal marijuana prohibition out in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. They've got a monument to the First Amendment right there on the corner of Fifth and Market Street. And they've got a little area outside that they call a free speech demonstration area. So we figured we'd demonstrate a little free speech by lighting some joints at 420. And it was such a nice spot, we decided to come back every single month at 420 to light some more joints. And things went really well. On April 20th, 2013, about 1,000 people showed up and lit joints in front of Independence Hall. Nobody was arrested, nobody was cited. But it kind of put us on notice with the authorities because when we came back in May, there was like 50 of us with joints, and there were 400 cops there, tactically armed, ready to address us. Seriously. I didn't know that the National Park Service had riot gear, but they have riot gear, and it's green. And they wore it for us with our joints. I'm a Quaker. The most dangerous thing I have is a joint. So, and it's not a dangerous thing, believe me. So we were kind of shocked at how we were treated, but they went even further because the U.S. attorney was there with all those cops. And the U.S. attorney, the federal
You were a
prosecutor,
big threat, Chris.
oh my gosh, yes. If we threatened them with our joints and our lighters, they're very scary. It was funny. It was funny up until we got sentenced, I have to say. So, it was 10 years ago. It was March of 2014 that I got sentenced in court, and that was for me one of the scariest days of my life. In front of a federal judge who said to me, "Mr. Goldstein, I strongly considered putting you in prison for 30 days for these offenses. But I got 2 years of supervised federal probation. It turned into 40 supervised drug tests at my house, a $3,000 cash fine, and a permanent federal criminal record for half a gram of cannabis. So I got pardoned this year, and it was a result of the website the Department of Justice created. For people like me, if you do have a simple possession charge, you can put your information in and they send you your pardon in the email. So it is a very modern thing. It was a very good experience to get the pardon. But that's how I got arrested.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Val, would you mind?
Not at all. I didn't get arrested, but I got caught smoking weed in a forest. I was hiking Mount Olympus in Utah and just really having a Zen moment when the police showed up with the wrong energy, acting like they were doing some kind of favor and they searched my whole car. They found the pipe. So I got possession and paraphernalia. Also, I had a little more than half a gram. I do feel really bad for you, Chris, for just getting busted with such a small amount, but no more than an eighth. And they acted like they were on the Lord's errand, they were so offended that I would even be smoking weed. I got $1,000 fine, 6 months of drug court, 6 months of drug tests that I had to pay for. I lost my license. I was unable to maintain the productive schedule I had, which involved two jobs, one of which was teaching children. And the biggest feeling I had at the moment was here you are interrupting my life and productivity and contributions to society because you think that me smoking a plant is wrong. And now I don't teach children anymore. So, and there's a problem in the workforce finding actual teachers willing to help children. So that was a big moment of awareness in my life that these laws are more harmful than helpful, and that there is such a great need to stand up and still activate exactly what President Biden said to release all the nonviolent drug offenders from prison and help people be contributing citizens of society without any records holding them back.
So let's talk a little bit about that record. You both talked about how about the honestly humiliating and expensive and disruptive results of those charges, right? But what happened long term? How did having that record impact you?
Mm. Yeah, you talked about teaching, Val, and I have to say that I was an adjunct instructor too, and in the academic professions, whether you're teaching little kids or college students, having that record is something that's it's going to create a stigma right away in the profession. They don't get to see that it's a half a gram on your record. It just sort of pings as a federal drug record. And at that moment, that's where the pardon can really help. Having a printed out presidential pardon with your name on it is the answer to that record, even though it still exists. But the reality is, for parents, for anybody working in the academic professions, this is something that's going to come up regularly, and it can prevent anybody from working in these spaces. But that's where it's the most common too. And it is really something that it comes up more often than you'd think in the modern world.
Yes, I agree. It weighed really heavy on me for a decade, wondering if that was always lingering in the background. Every time I applied for a job and they ask, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" I'm thinking, how much do they know? Will this automatically show up? Can I lie about this? And it's just a total mind warp on having righteous desires to work, to pay taxes, to contribute to society, and knowing that this little thing is lingering in the background the whole time.
Yeah.
And it does create like a stigma too, where the when you apply, I mean, where it comes up isn't just in academia, it's with housing, it's as a parent coaching a softball team, or even just taking a kid on a trip. So this is everywhere where you get a background check on your criminal background anymore. So having it, and I think that there's more understanding, like at the state level, it kind of shows up as marijuana, but the federal records, it just says federal drug record. People are like, oh, federal drug record, huh? So how many thousand pounds of cocaine were you shipping in from Bolivia? That's immediately kind of where it goes. So if you get a chance to explain it, you're lucky, but often you don't even have a conversation.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, this is like you mentioned some of those when you get a background check, but I mean, we live in the modern world with the internet. People could just, for fun or to just see learn stuff about your neighbors or anything like that. People are gonna search this stuff up, and it's on the public record. So this is almost like the first thing that people get to know about you after your name, and without even the context, the detail, the story around it.
I actually spoke to the White House after these blanket pardons were issued. My sister looked up my record for fun and it was still on it.
Yeah, so that's actually it doesn't get rid of your record is still there. You can just get the letter. But let's talk about that. How did y'all feel when you first heard about these pardons? Was there a moment of relief? Did you even hear about it? How did you hear about it? What was your thought?
My friend Weldon Angelos had told me he'd been working with the White House. They were issuing these pardons and that he knew about my situation and said, "You qualify for this." And I was like, "Oh, really?" He's like, "Yes, I need your information, blah, blah, blah." At the time, I was doing a million other things and it wasn't even a priority because by then, in the last decade, I completely switched my lifestyle. Righteous were the desires to teach, but because of having something like this on my record, I chose a completely different profession. I went all in on the arts. My husband and I now live in Los Angeles. We work in Hollywood. And these people aren't really caring if you have a little bit of marijuana on your record. So we've been able to be prosperous in other ways. But here's the government shooting itself in the foot because teachers are desperately needed. And I'm not going to be one anymore because I don't want to play these little games. So when Weldon helps me do that, it turns out this is totally crazy, but I felt that I had this on my record for 10 years and that pardon would actually help. It turns out that the drug court that I did 10 years ago somehow, some way qualified me for something I'm not even clear on, and that I don't actually qualify to get a printout pardon like Chris does.
Oh, you're on mute, Kat.
Of
Yep.
It's
course I
insane.
am. Yeah. Yeah, you can read my lips. Yeah, I do that too. It is that's crazy that that would be the case, right?
This is how the government works, though. Yay, E for effort. Thanks for doing that, but you need to do better.
Yeah. No, yeah, and that's why we're coming to DC with because we do need to do better.
That
Um
is crazy. So you don't qualify to get the pardon certificate. That's so
That's
strange.
that's what I was told by Weldon and attorney Eric Luna that the drug court that I did had already done something, and I know the somethings, and this is all really
Hmm.
vague, but that's exactly how I feel about the law and what's happening. It's all really vague.
It's all really vague. And let me also point something out here. You know more about drug policy and about the criminal justice system than most people who have these charges on their records. You know, you may not be a lawyer, but you're an SSDP or you've worked on these laws, you know about these laws, you've taken an interest in them for a long time, and it's hard for you to figure it out. And that says something. How many people are being held back who don't even know how to approach this, right? Even when we talk about these pardon letters, one of the things that I know has come up for the White House, Chris, you mentioned that online application system they have. And this may have changed, but I believe they don't even know how many people are eligible for those pardons, and they don't think that most of the people who are eligible for those pardon letters even know about them, right? So I mean, this is we all know about this. We've all been talking about the Biden pardons, but we're a small bubble in this larger world of people who've been negatively impacted by the war on drugs.
No, I hear you. And there is a super awareness gap for sure. And that's why they wanted to do the event at the White House that I went to a couple of weeks ago. But, before I went to the White House, I actually visited the pardon attorney at her office at the Department of Justice, which was a super learning experience for me about all of this. And Val, what's interesting, did you say you got your pardon in 2022 before the 2023 proclamation? That's interesting. Okay. So what is most interesting is I had applied in 2022, but I didn't get my pardon until January of 2024. And that's because in December, the president issued another expanded proclamation. A lot of applications and a lot of paperwork was held up until that expansion was issued in December. So that December proclamation was really important. That's what pushed my pardon through and why I got mine like right in January. But I also found out that they used that expanded proclamation to advance a bunch of individual clemency requests. So there was a backlog of people who had applied for marijuana related clemency cases. They didn't have a website up, but you could have done it before the president did all this. You could have applied if your sentence had been 2 years out. If you had completed your sentence for 2 years, you could apply for a presidential pardon. But before that required a pair of FBI agents coming to your house to investigate you to get your clemency. So a lot of people did not apply because they didn't want the FBI coming to their house. Might have prevented me too. I would not want the
I
FBI
wouldn't have
coming to
done
my house.
it.
Right. Seriously, right? Even now, I think, when you mentioned the gap there, so let's talk about two things. Who's eligible and why are people applying? Who is eligible? If you look at the December 2023 expansion, and when President Biden and Vice President Harris say that thousands of people are eligible, they're probably being accurate. Because if you look at all the lines of different offenses in there, that covers not just simple possession, but something that they threw around a lot, especially on women caught in drug cases, like federal drug cases, attempted possession, which is a hilarious charge to throw at somebody. But they convicted a lot of people on attempted marijuana possession in a bigger federal case. Same thing is attempted or use of marijuana. Seriously. So there are a lot of people in there, but also in the expanded clemency cases, in the individual requests, there are people who were advanced without having to send the FBI agents out. So when they say who's eligible, they're getting rid of a backlog of cases that way, as well as people who can apply. Now, technically, when the president says you're pardoned, you're pardoned. But like Val and I know, our record is there. So when you tell someone, you walk out on the street, they're like, dude, I see your record. I'm like, I have a presidential pardon. They're like, okay, can you show it to me, please? Right. So that's why the certificates and applying to get one is important, because it's an answer to your record. And if somebody says, do you have a pardon? And you have this little piece of paper, it says, Chris Goldstein, pardoned by President Biden, they look at it, they smile, they're like, okay, cool, right? And then that should ameliorate the situation. But again, you don't often get to that point of a conversation. Oftentimes the stigma is already kick you out of that conversation to begin
Yeah,
with.
how often are they going to actually ask you, "Hey, did you receive a pardon for this?" They're just
Right.
going to see that come up and then the conversation's over. You're not advancing to the next step of whatever that process is, right? So,
Exactly. Now,
but yeah, so
now
is this enough? What else do we need here?
it's not enough. We need record expungement. And, even for the simple possession cases, for everybody who's eligible for a pardon, no matter how many people that is, I still have my record. Val still has her record. We can't get rid of that record at all. So what we'd like is to expunge our records, and that's something Congress has to work on immediately. There's no way to get rid of your federal, even possession of marijuana record right now. So federal expungement is something Congress must address right now. When it comes to what the president can do, it's about commutations. So that's the word that we're looking for in clemency for people in prison. And again, people who are in prison for marijuana offenses can apply for individual commutations right now. What we're asking for is something broader and bigger than that. And that's to fulfill something along the lines of the promise that's been mentioned. Now, campaign promises are hard to deliver on. And that one was made in the previous campaign. We're already in another presidential election. So they could be making more promises tomorrow. So it is vital and really important that even before the next election takes place and we get into a new round of promises, that we get some of these fulfilled.
I think
Commutations,
that's
I'm
really
sorry, go ahead.
no, if I can just plug right now, that's really the idea behind this whole 420 week of unity. It's that we're in this special moment now. We have the support from Americans of both major political parties across demographics who overwhelmingly want to see marijuana legal, and they want to see people out of prison. That's part of it. And they want to see people's records cleared, and they don't want this to be a hanging issue. And so, we've got the power here if we just recenter this issue, if we make sure that Americans who do support us, who do agree with us, understand that, marijuana is not legal. Yeah, maybe you can buy it on an app or at a really nice looking store on your corner, but there are people just a couple miles away from that store sitting behind bars for far less than is behind that shop counter. Right. There are people like you, like Val, who have had their lives entirely changed, your original path, your dreams for your future derailed by these charges, who are still facing these same charges. There were 250,000 people arrested last year. All of these things are ongoing. And I think we've got this opportunity right now to recenter it, to make it part of the national narrative, to make sure that Americans, voters who do support our cause, understand that this is still a cause to get behind. And yes, push on the administration, push on Biden to follow through with his promise coming into his second election, the promise that wasn't quite achieved in this term, although I think that the pardons were supposed to kind of ameliorate our concerns around that, right? And I think us going there and saying, "Hey, this is not enough. We need more," is part of it, but also going to Congress, knocking on the doors. We're going to knock on the doors of everybody in the House and everybody in the Senate and make sure that they know that, we've all come together, left, right, industry, and we're saying, hey, we need descheduling. We need retroactive justice. We need our records cleared. And then bringing it back home, making sure that we're making this an issue at the state and local level. And I think that we really do have that opportunity right now. So I'm sorry for taking a moment to evangelize. I think that like the power is with us. We just
Yeah.
have to change that narrative to make sure that people understand what's at stake.
You should evangelize away. I mean, I'm telling people that cannabis voters are like the Fremen in Dune. You can't count us. We're out there though, and we show up. We're a power on election day. And we voted at the state level. Millions and millions of us have voted at the state level to change state constitutions, change the law. We've engaged in the process on regulations. Now at the federal level, during these election years especially, we're still out here. There might not be a ballot initiative in the state because we've already passed them, but we're still out here and we're ready for another election year. So in election years, I'm a grassroots guy. So in election years, we usually get more during an election year than we do non-election years. And this is such a critical election year. And you mentioned the bipartisan support. It's true. This is an issue that rings on every harmonic with the American public. And those two key topics, descheduling and clemency, those are the things that everyone agrees on. So that's why I love working on this issue. It gives us an innovation space, because when we solve problems in this space, drug policy and cannabis, it carries over. These are solutions that work all over the place. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, with SSDP, we understand it's not just about the war on cannabis. Right now, we're focused on that because we've got some opportunities right there, but it's the larger war on drugs. It's all of these related policies that really have, over the last decades, several decades, kind of shaped our wider society in a lot of negative ways. And so this is just the first small step there.
It's a war on America. We're better than this. As far as freedom, liberty, and justice for all, I feel so grateful to be a part of Students for Sensible Drug Policies and the Cannabis Activist Network, because we truly are one of the people and organizations who are upholding those great values this nation was based on: liberty and justice for all.
So what are our next steps here?
Accountability is key. Just as the government and every single job would expect an individual to be accountable, we must hold them equally accountable. If you say you're going to do something, you must, absolutely must, honor your word and fulfill your promise. And it's up to us to be there, whether you're physically in Washington or calling in contact with your representatives, to encourage and put that pressure on. That President Biden did say that exact quote that Kat said at the beginning of this meeting. And step by step, we uphold our representatives to serve the people, by the people, for the people.
That was very inspirational.
Hmm.
So,
I love everything that you're saying is so spot on. I mean, it is in our hands. I think in politics we feel like that it is the politicians who are steering the boat a lot of the time. But the truth is I know during election seasons, they have to come back to their base district. They have to really relate to us. So again, this is a critical year. And what are the next steps? I think that honestly, I've been working on this for 26 years. This is probably the best opportunity we've had to land some of these goals. We've got the first White House ever who's willing to work on a legalization platform. They're taking actions that we've asked every White House to take. They've actually done more in the last couple of years to keep the conversation going on federal reform than Congress has done in a long time, quite frankly. So I really do think that we're doing a lot of good things, but this is the opportunity. We can't miss these key opportunities and get caught in too much organizational infighting either. We have clear goals here to deschedule cannabis. And I think that those goals are landable in the next few years, especially as we maybe elect some different people to Congress in the couple of years too. But the clear goals are to stay on point, to stay focused. And I think that that's something that we're sort of finding again in this movement right now. And I hear it in the grassroots, and that's why we're coming to Washington next week from my area. I think that that message of descheduling and the message of clemency is strong, it's clear, it resonates, and that's what activates people to like travel down to DC and do a citizen lobbying day. So staying focused on that stuff, that's the key, because those are the winning components of reform right now.
absolutely. Well, I was going to ask you too, since you're both going to be coming to DC, what you're most excited about. I think you've basically told us already, but we have the larger organizational mission. What are you, individual humans, Chris and Val, excited about next week? Or not even this next week, this week. This is the first day of this week. We've been building up for months now. What are you looking forward to?
I am really excited for this moment, excited to connect with fellow SSD peers, meet new ones, and the greater grassroots cannabis organization at large. Washington, D.C. is where it all happens. And I believe with our time, our essence, and our energy, that each one of us can make an incredible impact with every moment we have there. The work has already been laid before us. The intentions are set. And if we go in there focused, we will create change.
I love
Paul,
it.
I look forward to going to the Hill, that National Cannabis Policy Summit. I've never been to that. So I'm
I
really
think this
looking
is
forward to
actually the
this.
first year that they're doing it. The National
Oh,
Cannabis
cool.
Festival. Yeah, they've put together an advocacy coalition of organizations. SSDP is one of them, and they're leaning into this idea that, we've got this burgeoning legal industry, and it's time to bring that back to policy and kind of make this vision come true. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for the policy summit too. But please continue, Chris. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, I think that that's one of the demonstrations of unity that's happening. Also, too, I think in the past we've had these lobby days, these citizen lobby days with SSDP and Normal, and that's been cool. But seeing this really bigger coalition of grassroots groups, NACDL, everybody's pitching in this time. So I do think
Reason
that
Foundation. We've
yes,
got, yeah, M for MM. We've got all sorts of groups, left, right. We've got the industry. We've got the advocacy. Yeah, I think it's big because this is big, and we all agree.
yeah, no, and it's solid. I think that the Unity Day message is strong this year. And I remember back in the day, I used to work with Barney Frank, who was like the first openly gay member of Congress, and Ron Paul from Texas, Rand's father. So, there used to be there used to be a different conversation of bipartisan marijuana reform in Congress. And now you're right, it's swinging back in that direction. It's not exactly Barney Frank and Ron Paul over there anymore, but to the same extent, I do think that there is a better bipartisan conversation happening this year than I've heard in a while. So I'm glad that we're all going to be a part of this.
Yeah, I'm so
Yes.
excited. I want to give everyone a chance to ask questions. I know there are some. I see one from Callie Hoffman, who is a member of our board and just an amazing activist in her own right. She's been doing a big lift, helping put together. SSDP is working alongside Freedom Grow and Blaze Responsibly, as well as the Green Thumb Industries and Ascend Collab to put together this massive project. It's called Breaking the Paper Shackles. We've done a little bit of soft stuff, but this is our big launch this week where we're working on breaking those paper shackles of having a criminal record because of the war on drugs. And we're trying to get people's records checked. We found that a lot of people just don't know that they have charges. We're trying to help them start getting those records cleared. I encourage you all to come out and visit that. We're having 3 expungement resource fairs over the course of this week. On Wednesday at the MLK Library, the same time as the National Cannabis Policy Summit. And then on Friday and Saturday, that's 420, at the National Cannabis Festival. We've worked together with Blaze Responsibly. We've got guides for all 51 states, 50 states plus DC, that shows people who's eligible, how to get there, what the steps are, and then connects them with pro bono, low bono resources to be able to get that process and clear. And, it's just the first step, putting this together. One of the biggest things we learned is how much policy needs to change so that we can actually get more of this work done. But we're committed to doing the work that we can do while we're there. And Callie has been a huge part of that. So I just wanted to shout her out when I saw she had a question here. But Callie asks, has there been any tangible benefit to receiving a pardon?
For me, unfortunately, no.
That's fair.
I think the best benefit, I've only had it since January. So for me, printing it out has been one of the coolest pieces of street magic I can do. I
Can
can
we see
produce
it?
that
Can you
pardon.
show it? Can you
Yeah,
show it
hold on,
to
let me go
us?
grab it. Give me one second.
I saw a photo of it. That's been pretty cool. Um,
He said street magic.
It is like street magic. So it's like you print this out, you print it out and you hand it to people, and there's the pardon there. And and you put it in people's hands. And I'm talking, you put it in the hands of grizzled Pennsylvania and New Jersey legislators, right? And then they start looking at it and they grizzled. There's this real change. They're like, that's a pardon for weed. That's a presidential weed pardon. So the best benefit is the coolest piece of street magic I've ever done is in my pocket right now. And watching people have a sense of awe and joy over reading a marijuana pardon has been one of the cool experiences. Tangibly, I will, the next time I apply for an adjunct position at a college or university, I am going to staple this to the top of my application so that when they search my criminal record, it's the first thing that they see. Um, I hope that there will be more tangible benefits for it in the future. But also, too, it opens up a conversation. I think that what the president has done is created a national conversation about marijuana pardons. Governor Maura Healey in Massachusetts issued 400,000 of them recently. And I do think it has started the conversation about how states can do better about this, too. So it has opened a vehicle of advocacy here in a big way as well. So tangibly, it's a great piece of street magic, and it has created a lot of good policy. So it has had a
Also
tangible
got you
benefit
an
that way.
invite to the White House where you got Kamala Harris on the record saying we need to legalize marijuana. I think that I got to shout that out because that's huge.
That's true. It did get me an invitation to the Roosevelt Room, which was very I did not expect that with the half-gram joint that I got arrested with 10 years ago. But and I do have to say, that meeting at the White House was more expansive than marijuana. What surprised me about the meeting in the Roosevelt Room that day was that Vice President Harris took on her own sort of record as a drug war prosecutor, but the conversation was more about dealing with marijuana in the short term and having the White House deal with the issues we talk about a lot of times at SSDP and Drug Policy Alliance, but the wider issues of the drug war in the future. So I did not expect Vice President Harris to talk about the sentencing disparities between crack and powder cocaine in that meeting, but that came up. And I did not expect her to talk so extensively about her own drug war record. That came up. I did not expect her to publicly say that the scheduling of marijuana was, quote, in her words, absurd. That was awesome too. So, yes, that was definitely a cool result of getting the pardon. But part of why they invited me there and the other guests who got pardons was they want more people to apply. They want more people to get the pardons. So when you talk about expungement clinics and things like that, if you're doing these, getting the marijuana pardon in the Department of Justice website interface is easy. So I would encourage anybody who's doing those
Yeah, we're
expungement
actually
clinics.
putting together
Yeah.
a resource. We'd hope to have it ahead of this week. We don't have it quite yet, but we will have it soon to help get the word out and have people just quickly. It's an easy form to fill out.
So easy. And I do think that it's intimidating for people to go to the Department of Justice and put all their personal information to see if they're eligible. So if there are attorneys out there who are working pro bono on expungement clinics, just helping people check if they're available and eligible before they put their information in the Department of Justice, that might help them a little bit too.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I see another question here from Yi Wu, another alum.
Yee
Val,
woo!
you remember, yeah. So Yi, hey Yi. Yi says, what were forces within the admin that opposed or delayed pardons, and are the same forces still attempting to block reforms today?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that there was anybody in the administration per se who blocked or were against the pardons. There was a process that they had to go through for sure. This was, as you pointed out early on, one of the first big mass pardons that any White House has issued. So the Department of Justice and the pardon attorney had some figuring out to do after those pardons were issued to get all these certificates out. But they did do some really good innovations. I will tell you that most recently, there were some hearings in Pennsylvania at the Health Committee where I heard like Pennsylvania Republicans really question giving people expungements ever. And there are still 12,000 possession arrests happening in Pennsylvania today. And again, I mean, we haven't found political traction to completely stop marijuana arrests in Pennsylvania even today. So is there opposition to stopping arrests? Is there opposition to granting pardons and expungements? I've seen it in person. It does exist, but not at the White House, thankfully.
So I think it also depends on what you think of as administration, because I think if you're thinking about the administration to include the larger executive branch, what I've heard and what a lot of us in this movement have heard is that the DEA is getting a lot more active in Congress and lobbying because they're threatened. They don't want this cash cow of marijuana to be legalized. And so where we're hearing a lot more scare stories around stuff like, oh, fentanyl in the marijuana and things like that. You know, our board member Axel Bilbao did a great podcast a while ago talking kind of debunking that myth on why no one is lacing your buds with fentanyl and stuff like that. But we are getting all these big scare stories because there are people who do benefit from a war on cannabis and they don't want it to end. I see another question here from Doug McVeigh, which is very cool, by the way.
Doug
I
McVeigh.
have your books. Doug asks, events like the 4th of July smoke-in have, in a sense, been mass acts of mass civil disobedience, with attendees smoking publicly and daring police to make arrests. In today's climate, are events like this still meaningful, and should they continue? So that's a great question. I will say, and I want to hear from both Val and Chris on this, I will say that we didn't do exactly that, but right after the October 6, 2022 pardon, SSDP put together a protest at the White House just about 2 weeks later. So this was real organizing, getting students from around the country to the White House in a couple weeks. But to remind folks that this wasn't actually fulfilling the campaign promise that President Biden made, that in fact, marijuana was still illegal and not a single person was let out of prison. What we did was we played his campaign speech on loop in front of the White House. We did a big thing. We did a lot of stuff, and we weren't sure. We did legal training for everybody who was going to participate, making sure that they knew, like, hey, here's how the court system works. It's really complicated when it comes especially to the White House and to DC, who's in jurisdiction where, you know, where you would go, what kinds of charges, and we were worried about it. And there were cops there, but they all overwhelmingly kept telling us, we really, really don't want to arrest you because this is going to look bad. So, you know, we did, one of our board members was eventually arrested, and but this was hours later. And so yeah, that's at least our experience. They know that at least when it comes to the White House, when it comes to Washington DC, it's not good for them politically to be seen arresting people on this issue.
I think that's, and I agree. I doubt that they're going to be motivated to arrest people for simply smoking marijuana anymore. However, I've asked reporters. I was arrested in a national park. I've asked every reporter who's covered my pardon to call the National Park Service and ask what they're doing, and get them on record somehow, and talk about what they're doing about marijuana arrests. They will not go on record about it so far. So the real world is, I doubt that they're going to. I mean, I plan to go to the vigil on later this week. I plan to smoke a joint in front of the White House. Before I went into the White House, I smoked a joint. I smoked a joint in front of the Department of Justice before I went into the Department of Justice. So I don't feel, I mean, I don't feel like too risky about that. I do carry my pardon around with me in my briefcase. So, you know, maybe that helps a little bit. Or maybe I should put it onto a t-shirt. I'm not sure. But back to Doug's original point, do you think that these events are still worthwhile? Yeah, I do. I mean, again, we still have arrests happening in Pennsylvania. And quite frankly, even in legalized states, there's a stigma against cannabis consumers. I live here in New Jersey. We have a clothing optional beach here. We have many beaches where you can walk your dog. There is no beach in New Jersey where you're allowed to smoke cannabis, technically. So I think that there's a lot of ways we need to go for consumer rights and to break the stigma. And I think for all the beer gardens I see in the world, I think that smoking marijuana in public is certainly something that is a valid protest, unfortunately.
So let me also, I feel like I sounded a little bit overly optimistic on this, because it's true that they don't want to arrest people who are protesting, who, you know, who look like us, none of us are teenagers. We're not like, we all have media training, we're savvy, we know how to carry ourselves in a certain way. There are cameras on our protests. These are very different situations. Arrests are still happening. This is a huge issue. It's not done by any means. I mean, I already talked about the at least 250,000 Americans who were arrested last year. But it happens even in places here like Washington, D.C., after we passed I-71, which is our mostly legal cannabis legislation, right? It allows you to possess, gift, grow, or consume cannabis, but only on private property and if you're over the age of 21. So we actually saw arrest rates go up in DC after the passing of I-71. And it wasn't for people like me, it was for mostly young people, for teenagers, and for people who lived in public housing. And so, I mean, and these are people, it's a lot harder to advocate, and it's a big issue. And it's really why we need to be really mindful about how we're passing these policies, how we're thinking about who gets impacted. You mentioned the crack cocaine sentencing disparities, right? And that was a big deal. It used to be the case, it used to be a big issue in the drug policy world that powder cocaine, was sentenced at 100th of the length of sentence as crack cocaine, even though they are literally the same drug, right? They're just slightly different formats of ingesting the same drug, but they have a different demographic attached with them, right? And so we were able to bring that down to an 18-to-1 sentencing disparity. And this was a compromise that was made as we were trying to push this through. And the idea was, okay, well, so many people care about this, fine, we'll bring it down to 18-to-1 and then it'll disappear. Well, it's been a while since we brought it down to 18-to-1, and it's no longer an issue because everyone was like, well, you already solved that. And people are still getting sentenced at 18 times the length of sentence if they have crack cocaine versus if they have powder cocaine. Yeah, and so I do think that this is something that we need to be concerned about. Arrests are still happening. Arrests are still happening miles from the White House, near the White House, etc. It's just not as much people like me and Val and Chris. It's poor, mostly Black teenagers.
We, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're okay. If this happened in Utah, there would be a lot of arrests. I think you have to be careful. Like Kat said, public housing is also something that could be jeopardized. But like Doug said and brought up, there's nothing more beautiful. There's no more beautiful protest than the act of civil disobedience. And while I'm not necessarily organizing people to smoke a joint to prove a point, if Chris smokes a joint in Washington, I'll smoke a joint in Washington.
It's all about the unity, y'all.
It is, and it's funny. I've smoked some of my best joints in front of the White House, thinking back on it, and there have been times where the police have been tough, but there have been other times where I've just smoked a joint in Lafayette Park and enjoyed the afternoon and nobody's messed with me at all. It's kind of funny. But also to your point about who gets arrested and how, in New Jersey, when we passed legalization, we made sure to pass a decriminalization law that was in concurrence that applied to all ages, so that police can't even approach anybody under 18 for the smell of marijuana in New Jersey. In Philadelphia in 2014, when we wrote the decrim ordinance in that city, it applies to all ages, so that the $25 non-criminal ticket is given to juveniles as well as to adults. So to your point, that is something that we have learned a lesson on. And that is a hard lesson we learned in early adoptive states like Colorado and Washington, D.C., where police enforcement was redirected right at kids and right at teenagers. It was not cool. And we learned to make sure to cut that off right before any of it started in New Jersey and Philadelphia and other places. But that's something I talk with legislators about all the time. When we talk about decriminalizing cannabis, whether it's at the municipal level or the national level, this is something that has to apply to all ages, very simply. There shouldn't be a 21 or 18, it's an all ages. It should be an all ages policy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a difference between arrest rates have gone up in states that only legalize adult use, but not in states that decriminalize cannabis use. But I also want to talk that cannabis marijuana thing, because I had an interesting conversation with you about New Jersey. And I know this is the case I know we're talking about federal law when it comes to this week, but we're bringing these fights back to our states, right? And so this is a larger issue. I think this is really interesting. Can you explain to me how cannabis and marijuana are maybe treated a little differently under the law, even though they're literally the two words for the exact same thing?
Right. So everybody is going to have to take a leap into quantum cannabis with me today, because in New Jersey, we did something really weird. We left marijuana with the M in Schedule 1 of our state CSA, but we created new legal definitions for medical and adult use cannabis that we sell outside of that. And what we do now is that everything that is unregulated is used as marijuana enforcement. So that's why they left it there. And then everything that is regulated is called cannabis. So again, here you have a plant that is in a quantum state where it exists simultaneously in different galaxies of the law. But that really doesn't work. So when we talk about descheduling, I hope that folks realize some states have descheduled cannabis. I want to be clear. Virginia descheduled cannabis. That was an important recent one. But most states haven't. So when we're talking about the descheduling conversation, it's something that you can have at the federal and state level. And even if you've legalized marijuana in your state, it's a conversation that still needs to happen.
And it's also important when people ask, why are we asking for descheduling, specifically cannabis at the federal level? Some of those state legislators are really pushing back over this idea a bit of descheduling at their level, because they're saying, well, but it's under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. And so we have to follow that. And so if we deschedule marijuana, which is the word used in the Controlled Substances Act, that removes that argument for them. And then it makes it easier for us to stop having this sort of weird, like, Twilight Zone distinction between legal cannabis and illegal marijuana.
Well, and also too, there's some sunset clauses too. In the state CSAs, there are sunset clauses built in so that if the federal law changes, the state law is supposed to be automatically addressed. However, that doesn't happen vice versa. So again, the descheduling conversation, removing marijuana completely from the Controlled Substances Act of regulations, and removing the word marijuana from those CSAs at the state level, that's a conversation that everybody can continue to have at the federal and the state level.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Val, thanks for bringing your little one up there. I definitely, this question was not on, I did not prep you for this question, but it's something I think about a lot. I'm also a mother. I have two little ones. And I think that when we talk about the war on drugs, we talk on the war on cannabis. A lot of times people are talking about, oh, we're doing it for the kids. We want to keep kids safe. And, you know, we're both moms. We're pushing for legalization. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but how do you reconcile that?
Please don't ever apologize for putting me on the spot, because these kids are the future. They deserve to know what is right and have parents who stand up for what is right in this world. And cannabis never should have been illegal. This is a plant, and from a religious standpoint, or specifically speaking to Christians and Christianity, God said, behold, I give you all wholesome herbs. In the first book of the Bible, every plant bearing seed. So the fact that cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, was ever legal in the first place was wrong, unjust, unethical. And my goal in this movement is to erase these laws completely, as they always have been, and teach my children the exact same, so that we already have a 9-month-old baby fighting for justice.
I love it. Babies for a sensible drug policy. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I'm not a drug policy reform activist in spite of being a mother. I'm a policy reform activist in part because I'm a mother. It informs it for me, because I don't want my kids to live in a world controlled by prohibition, controlled by war on drugs, where families are broken up and destroyed because of people consuming a plant because of these basic things. And so, yeah, absolutely. This is not quite what we'd originally talked about, but this is a war that has been fought in the name of young people for so long, to keep young people safe. Young people are at the front lines of the war on drugs. They're oftentimes the ones being arrested, and they're the ones who are supposedly being kept safe by these laws that give them criminal records, that destroy their lives, that keep them in prisons, out of schools, unable to get a job, unable to get a mortgage, rent a home, etc. And, I think that all of us here are pushing back against that, whether we are young people, whether we're the parents of young people, whether we're people who have been impacted by the war on drugs. I think it's very clear that these policies, that the war on drugs, the war on cannabis is the problem. It's not cannabis that's the problem. So yeah, thank you for I guess letting me sum things up like this. I'm really excited to see you all in a couple days. In Washington, D.C. And just in one sentence, is there anything that what would you really like people to take out of this discussion here today?
I really want to thank everybody for being on this phone call. And if you take anything, appreciation for your time, your care, your motivation, and your energy. We are stronger together. And I'm really grateful for SSDP organizing and every organization for organizing and every single person in this conversation for lending even an ounce of your spirit to organize and change the things that really do deserve to be changed in this way.
Thank you.
That's awesome. You know, if you're coming down to DC or when you're working on this issue, I always tell my grassroots organizers that our boss is a plant and she has won more votes than any politician ever. And we have to stand up for a community that is around this, one of the most amazing politicians in American history called Cannabis. So that's what I'm out there to do next week. And I hope everyone takes that away.
This week, Chris, it's here. We're at the 420 Week of Unity. So thank y'all both. Thank you, Valerie, Chris, for joining. For everybody who tuned in, had some amazing questions, really kept this discussion going. And I'm so excited for the energy that we're all bringing to this week, that we're bringing to Washington, D.C. All of the great work that I know we're going to do, and the change that's going to come out of it, because I do know that this is our moment and we're going to make something big happen here, and we're going to bring that energy home, and we're going to make something big happen all across the United States this November and going forward. So thank you. I'm so excited. You can find us more at ssdp.org, or find us on social media. We're there more often than we are on the website. And you can find Val and Chris at their respective organizations or online. And honestly, find us here in Washington, D.C. this week, 420 Week of Unity. Thank you.
Thank you.